But then as you progress, then it's like, okay, let's work on not only just upper body pulling strength, so like pronated, so palms facing away, like you would do for a strict pull up, but let's mix the grip. All right. So we do chin ups, so a supinated grip. Then we do ring pull ups, so like a neutral grip. Then we do pull ups on the rope, right? So it's like we can get that grip specific pulling. And so I kind of move through that continuum and mix up the grips that they're pulling with.
The fitness movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com. Welcome back to part 2 on rope climb. So today we're talking about the strength development aspect of this, and we'll probably use a bunch of examples and things that we've given to our athletes that have worked well. Just kind of speaking from experience, if you're curious about more about technique and efficiency of the rope climbs, both regular and legless, we did last week, episode number 78. We just did on the technique efficiency side of things. So if you're curious about that, go and listen to that episode. But today we're talking about more about the strength development aspect of things. So the first thing that we did off air before starting here was we kind of went back and forth and said, what do we think are appropriate prerequisites for a strength level for both a regular rope climb where you're using your legs and a legless rope climb? Chris, you want to go over this quick?
Yeah. So real quick, we kind of sat there and said, okay, what are the prerequisite strength levels? We kind of came up with broadly, we'd like to see an athlete be able to do at least one strict pull-up to start working on regular rope climbs, and then at least 5 solidly strict pull-ups to be able to, kind of look at legless rope climbs. We kind of talked about those are like the bare minimums of bare minimums, right? I know athletes who maybe can't really do a strict pull-up, but can get a rope climb because they're good. They're strong enough to hold their body and have good technique with their feet.
Spanish rap, but it takes them 90 seconds to do.
Right. Yeah. But, as with everything, guys, it's like, that's not necessarily advised, you know what I mean? So if your goal is to get better at the sport or even perform better in class, having those prerequisite strength levels, I think, come before, looking to do rope climbs themselves. So we said 1 strict pull up for regular rope climbs and then 5 for legless.
Yeah. And we kind of said, like, before that point, like, if you don't have those like solidly, there's just really no point in you even trying to accumulate practice. Like, the practice is just going to be suboptimal. It's not going to really mimic what you want to mimic. And even if you can get away with like a legless rope climb and not have 5 strict pull-ups, like we were saying, like maybe you have 3 and you start, doing attempts anyway, it's like the technique that you have to use that you're going to default to is just not going to be optimal, or like not what you really want to use to actually do a legless rope climb. You're going to have to basically keep 2 hands on it, kip kind of forward and backwards, and move your hand over hand really slowly up the rope, and it's going to not be what you actually want for a legless rope climb. It's one thing if you have like a competition and you're like prepping for it and you like don't have a choice, but if you have a choice, which is most of the time, probably shouldn't go about it that way.
Yeah. And that's time, like you said, it's not well spent from multitude of reasons. One is you'll get some skill development, but is it even the most applicable skill development, or can you even go down the continuum to apply it to the actual skill? But then not only that, it's like, do I really want to waste or take 15 minutes to work on that when that could be 15 minutes I could be spending on actually getting stronger, right? We all have a finite amount of time to work on this stuff. And so it's like, if I don't even have the barrier to entry for the movement in terms of a strength level, like that should be my sole focus when it comes to that movement specifically.
Yeah. And so once you're at those, or at least at those prerequisites, that's when we basically said, hey, you can start adding a little bit more skill practice. However, if you're anywhere close to those and it's still like a thought in your mind that like, ooh, maybe I'm not strong enough, you should probably still be having some structured strength work for upper body pulling built throughout your week. So we kind of thought about that as like strict upper body pulling from more of like the actual pulling system itself, but then also grip related strength, because that's one of the biggest thing for rope climbs in particular, because basically your gravity is pulling you parallel with the rope. It makes it really challenging to hold on to relative to something like a pull-up bar, which has to basically go through all your fingers. It's just a different kind of line of action.
Yeah, and you could also there's grip techniques when it comes to like holding a pull-up bar that you can like leverage the grip to kind of cinch into the pull-up bar and kind of hang. It's also just a different pulling grip altogether, more of a supinated or supinated grip and kind of it's supinated and like a grippy grip. Like you have to use all your fingers and forearm muscles to
Yeah.
hang on to it.
Yeah. If you're someone who hasn't done a bunch of rope climbs before, or if you're someone who you have really good pulling strength, so you can just get away with it, but you haven't had a lot of exposure to it. So like me, like 2 years ago, like when I did a bunch of rope climbs, because I wouldn't be responsible about it, I would just jump in and do like 20 plus in a Metcon right away. But like you could feel it through like your knuckles, like
Yes.
your fingers like twist a little bit, and it's like it's not just like your forearms, which is like what a lot of grip goes. It's like down into your fingers, the ligaments of your fingers. There's like a lot of little muscles that are taxed, and ligaments that typically don't in just like a regular kipping pull up or something along
Yeah.
those lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you think about splitting up that skill development of an actual rope climb or a legless rope climb along with pairing that with strength development? So, for example, would those be in the same session? Might that be split into two separate sessions? How might you pair that for an athlete?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on how much they need to work on that movement. So if it's a relatively new athlete and it's like, okay, this is something we're not great at, but we're working on it just, because you might have a local comp coming up versus someone who's like, all right, you're going to go to quarterfinals. And this is kind of like part of the repertoire of everything we're working on, then that might change. Right. And so
let me give you a more specific example. Let's say we have a female athlete. She's a quarterfinals level athlete. She will make it through. She's likely to see rope climbs or legless rope climbs. And relative to movements that involve the hips a lot, like her upper body pulling just lacks. What might you do for that made up athlete?
So for that athlete, I most likely would pair the skill work and the strength work in the same session. But what I would do is it would be to kind of place priority on the strength work and really just so I can hit it twice a week. Right. And so it's like, if I want her to do upper body pulling work twice a week, then I might say, okay, hey, before we hit our strength work, you're going to do, spend some time working on these drills with the rope climbs, doing some rope climbs, and then we're going to hit the strength stuff. And so that's probably what I would do there versus an athlete who is strong, right? Like their upper body pulling strength is there. They're just not efficient at the movement.
Yeah.
Then it's like we might do some upper body pulling, let's say once a week, and then do skill work twice a week, right? One on the same day of the upper body strength, and then one by itself where we might practice the skill and then implement it, let's say in like an EMOM format, not specifically 1 minute, but like just an on the clock format.
Yeah. I can think of two different athletes that I have right now. One kind of fits the mold that I just described, female athlete about quarterfinals level. For that person, typically they're not just needing work on rope climbs. Like
Right.
legless rope climbs might be like incredibly challenging, but also relative to the field of athletes, they need work on ring muscle up, bar muscle up, chest to bar, right? Anything where you get elbow flexion, they need more work. So it's not good enough just to give them, I'm going to give them rope climbs 3 times a week. It's like, no, they need to get better at all that stuff. So I think rope climbs can be a good tool throughout someone's week, but it's easy to like hyper focus on one thing and like miss all the other movements that they could need. So typically what I would do for an athlete like that is, like you're saying, like I might either put the rope climb afterwards in more of a conditioning based format because it's going to be more time under tension. It'll be more grip fatigue and you're probably not going to get a lot of quality work in after that. If it's something that's a little bit more dense, if it's something that's just like practice based, where I just want to accumulate a couple reps and to make them look as pretty and efficient as they can, it's going to be low fatigue. So it's like, you could probably do that towards the beginning of a session and then do, skill work or more like strength work after that. That's a little bit more structured.
Yep.
And just more like, strict pull-ups or something like that.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about how you might implement some grip strength or grip endurance training along with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we look at the continuum, right, we kind of talked about, okay, our prerequisite strength levels, get there first. Once you get there, then it's like, okay, continue to work on strength, but you can mix in some skill, right? And I would start kind of like with the 80-20 rule. Like when you look at the amount of training you're dedicating to rope climbs specifically, not your total training, but rope climbs specifically, 80%, if you just hit the threshold, it might be like 80% is still strength, 20% is skill. And then gradually that percentage will start to change as you get stronger to maybe more of like 50-50 or 40-60, something like that. But then as you progress, then it's like, okay, let's work on not only just upper body pulling strength, so like pronated, so palms facing away, like you would do for a strict pull up, but let's mix the grip. All right. So we do chin ups, so a supinated grip. Then we do ring pull ups, so like a neutral grip. Then we do pull ups on the rope, right? So it's like we can get that grip specific pulling. And so I kind of move through that continuum and mix up the grips that they're pulling with. And then once it's like, okay, we've gotten that pretty good, then we can work on some upper body pulling strength, continue to work on upper body pulling strength. And I said off the air, I really like hand over hand sled pulls because that mimics the exact upper body pulling motion you see on the rope, but with less chance of falling. Okay. And then
hopefully zero chance of
zero
falling
chance.
unless you're really
I fell down. You said there was no chance. So you won't fall. And there's less eccentric loading, which is where like people get real nervous, right? So, but then once we kind of get past all that, then it's like, okay, let's work on continue to build strength and really more endurance in your grip, right? Because at that point, you're strong enough to hold yourself on the rope and pull, right? So it's not really a strength thing. It then becomes an endurance thing. People then are not able to do rope climbs, not because they're weak, but because they're tired. And so a lot of things I like to do is create density sets. So like essentially like the same type of muscle group working throughout the set, right? With rest at the end. But with different movements. So like a great example was I was working.
You gave an example of this with the squatting episode that we did.
Yes.
So it was like, I forget, it was like front squat, sandbag, reverse lunge, wall ball was your example. And then you backload all the rest of the end. So it's the same thing, but grip, basically.
Yep. And it's really just a bodybuilding principle. Like, you'll have bodybuilders that will work on biceps and they might do like supinated chin ups, cable curls, and then like those baby weight curls for like a ton of reps to like burn the crap out of the muscle, right? You can take some of those principles and apply it to CrossFit to help build endurance in the muscles, right? Or some hypertrophy. And so with grip specifically, I was working an athlete with this and I would do something like I'd have her take those stress balls, right? The things you get that are like little foam and you squeeze them a bunch. And so I'd be like, hey, 50 stress ball squeezes per hand. And really that's just to pump blood into the forearms, which is essentially what happens when you're getting tired on a rope climb. Like your forearms are swelling up, they're pumped, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't hold on to the rope anymore. So I would do like 50 stress ball squeezes. And then it's like, all right, go hang out from the pull-up bar passively for 30 seconds. And then as soon as you're done with that, pick up kettlebells and do like, 150 or 200-foot farmer carry, then rest 2 minutes.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of CrossFit athletes complain about, oh, my grip blew up in this workout. And they say that kind of thing a lot. And it's like, I don't see a lot of people doing grip specific training. Right. And I don't think they need to be doing a lot because you do a lot of just gripping in your training already. However, I do think adding some stuff in, and I think it makes a ton of sense to do it on a rope climb day because the rope climb is a super taxing movement for your grip.
Yeah.
Plus, there's a good chance that we could see something like a farmer's carry or a heavy, kettlebell deadlift or something like that coming up this season. So I'll just throw that in there too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's always, like you said, it's always something that like some people will be like, yo, I struggle with grip stuff or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you should probably put some grip specific work into your program. And yes, we are working on grip stuff, right, with different movements, but it's the same principle as like, why do the best high level athletes do like upper body pulling accessory work, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're doing a ton of upper body pulling.
Why do you do strength snatch work or
yeah, or position work? It's like,
right.
It's the same concept where it's like, okay, I know I'm weak here and I can then partner it maybe on a day that like, okay, one day I'm doing, a lot of upper body pulling or grip intensive metcons. And then the other day, is less intensive, but I'm going to work on specifically that system without the aerobic fatigue and just continually pump blood through my forearms and work on my grip, that's really different, because it's like nothing else is stopping you from performing those sets other than the grip fatigue. And over time, that's going to build endurance in your grip as a metric, or as a part of what you do. And then that'll carry over, because you're still working on applying it to the sport. That'll continue to carry over more and more to the sport itself.
Yeah. Also, just like learning how to operate with, fatigue in like a muscle group is super, super important. Like, you need to be able to continue to move through reps even when you're blowing up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's something where you can do that where it's always in a Metcon and it's always super taxing, but it doesn't need to be that way all the time. Like,
Right.
It's really probably a smart idea to, if someone, for example, like I've actually experienced this with myself. Like, I have a hard time doing GHD sit-ups when my respiration's super high. So, I could just do Metcons with GHDs in it all the time, or I could do something that's a lot less taxing and do like, some hard rowing, get on, do a big set of GHDs, try to keep moving quickly through those, and then do a couple sets of that. And it's like, that's way more effective than like hitting the limitation that I actually want to hit.
Well, yeah, because you also then, because these factors, right? Or, I want to improve my grip, or I want to improve my breathing on my GHDs. They're not operating in a vacuum, right? And so you also have things like your joints and your CNS that you have to consider. And so it's like, okay, if I'm just going to pound Metcons day after day after day, not just Metcons, right? Because it's a loose term, but like super high intensity competition intensity Metcons, it's like you're going to wear down those other things, versus you could do a conditioning piece like you mentioned. So with your movement, the GHDs specifically, it's like, okay, maybe I do a 10 to 20 second assault bike sprint, and then go
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. And then you go into 20 GHDs and then you rest. And so it's like, I'm working on the skill of doing the GHDs with a high respiration rate, but I'm doing it with a very focused intent and with a movement like an assault bike, where it's like I can really crank my heart rate and my breath rate up, but not put as much pounding on my joints or my CNS.
Exactly. No, I really thought it was interesting that the hand over head sled work stuff is, I think, a great tool. Like you were saying, it mimics the rope climb, especially the legless rope climb, like perfectly, because in order to sequence that, you're also having to basically kind of do a lateral crunch with your trunk a little bit as you pull that direction, and it's tying in through your arm, through a little bit of your pec and the short head of your bicep especially. So I really like those. I also like supinated pull-ups and supinated strict chest to bars a lot. Just because everybody's always doing pronated and Metcons, and it's like a lot of their strength work and other stuff, and cleans and everything else is pronated. So I like getting people into supinated position, like palms facing you more often, just because I think it helps with elbow health as well. Because a lot of people get like that medial elbow pain when they start doing rope climbs. So if you can get in that position more frequently, it's only going to help that, right? It's as simple as like, if you have someone who, like a lot of CrossFitters get like anterior shoulder pain when they bench press. And it's like, if you bench press once in a while, it doesn't need to take up a lot of time or attention, but that'll probably go away just from like exposure to that range of motion. Cool. You got any other pet exercises that you like for developing rope climbs or grip or pulling strength?
I mean, not necessarily. The only other thing I would say is when developing grip endurance and you're integrating rope climbs into that, I think, like I said, starting with the sled pull is a great thing to do, because there's no threat of danger, for lack of a better term. It's like you're not gonna fall, and so it's like, okay, I can get the pump through that line of action without worrying. Like I've seen people all the time, they're like, where it's like, okay, you're strong enough to do a rope climb. People in class, right? You're strong enough to do a rope climb, but you haven't really worked on the skill, and you're just afraid, because it's like, I'm going to be up really high and I'm going to panic and I don't want to fall. And so it's like, all right, well, let's not worry about that now. Let's worry about, let's pull the sled, right? And then we talked about working on the grip work, and then integrating the rope climbs into that would be like, okay, we'll start with the rope climb, and then we'll do a rope climb or 2 rope climbs, whatever, into, maybe the stress ball squeezes into a farmer carry or into a passive hang, into something like that. And then I'll gradually work the rope climb down on where it is in that order
over a course of weeks, you're saying, like a progression. Yeah.
Exactly. So like the rope climb is first. So it comes after the rest. So you're quote fresh going into the rope climb. Like you're still going to have some residual fatigue.
Yeah.
Right. But it's a much different feeling having that movement first after, let's say, a 2-minute rest than last after all that other
Oh, yeah,
stuff.
100%.
And so that's kind of how I would do is start with the sled, then all the other stuff we talked about with grip, then integrate the rope climbs into the grip work, move it down that continuum, and then at the same time integrating it into like a true sport specific metcon format so that you not only have to deal with muscular fatigue but overall systemic aerobic fatigue as well.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I'll add is we've been talking a lot about upper body pulling because I think that is the limitation for a lot of people. Obviously, legless rope climbs especially. However, not always is that the limitation. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, quarterfinals 2021 is like most people, their grip and their upper body pulling was not the thing that slowed them down on those rope climbs. It's the fact that they couldn't lift their legs, like hip flexors.
I remember literally
and abs were just destroyed.
Able to pull my knees to my chest. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, normally I get like a lot of layback, lift my feet way up towards my like chin. It was literally like I stayed vertical the whole time when I was climbing. Didn't lean back at all. So yes, it's important to think about this, but when you're thinking about a movement, it's important to understand that the different combinations that come out that are going to be in a workout besides that thing are going to exacerbate whatever movements you use when you're actually doing a rope climb. So, and one of those things is also just like limitations in your core and your breathing. So like if it is just like, 10 rounds for time, 20 cow bike, 2 rope climbs, it's like, man, it's going to be really tough to do those just because you're going to be breathing really hard and you're not going to want to jump up on the rope. And that could be like, you literally don't want to jump. Right. And that could be the limitation. So it's always different on different things. I think it's just important to kind of put, flag that and make sure that we're not completely missing that in the conversation. And then the last thing we kind of talked about was there's a whole different demographic of athlete who is often male. They often have a larger training age. They often did a lot of more bodybuilding stuff and got into CrossFit a little bit later, who they have a surplus of pulling strength. And it's more about getting consistent blood flow, learning how to be consistent with the movement and be smooth and be effective and be, more about like the efficiency side of things that we talked about last time, and more about driving conditioning aspects and like muscular endurance into the movement, basically. Yeah,
absolutely.
Chris, thanks for doing this today.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just found the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while and enjoying what you're hearing, I would encourage you to leave a rating or review for the show. That would definitely help us out. And lastly, if you're someone who does take your fitness seriously and cares about your performance deeply, I would encourage you to look into hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.